Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Digital Pivot. This is EFC's second annual Supply Chain Summit, and it's my honor to welcome you to the virtual platform this year. This year is obviously a little bit different from all of us in that we're pivoting in so many different ways. And, EFC is really, really proud to put together a program for you today that I really do believe will help elevate your understanding and your footprint in the digital supply chain space. I wanted to just sort of remind everybody who's joining us just momentarily, if you could please keep your video turned off and your mic muted for the duration of the program. I do assure you that there will be an opportunity during the latter half of the program when we're going to have breakout sessions where you can all sort of interact with one another and the breakout facilitators. But for the presentations and the panel discussions, I please ask if you can keep your video turned off and your mic muted. I am Swati Vora-Patel with Electro-Federation Canada. And as you go through today's program, you're going to see that we've prepared a blended program where you're going to hear from two keynote presenters. You're going to actually hear from some of our customers on a panel discussion on sort of what they really would like to see moving forward in the digital supply chain space. And we also have put together 4 unique breakout sessions, giving you an opportunity to really dig a little bit deeper on a topic that might be of particular interest to you. So there's a lot of different dynamics happening this afternoon, and I'm really excited to offer the program to our members this year. Just a few house rules that I wanted to go through before we get started. As I've mentioned just moments ago, I do ask that everybody please keep themselves on mute and their video turned off for the duration of the program. There is a chat function that's been activated in this meeting, so if at any point in time you have any questions for the panelists or the presenters or anybody else for that matter, or if you just need to connect with me on something, please do enter it into the chat function and I will be monitoring that. Throughout the presentation, we're going to be moving between keynote presentations and panel discussions. So you're going to be prompted at moments in time to either go into speaker view or into gallery view. Speaker view will give you a presentation with the presenter side by side, and gallery view will allow you to see everybody who's part of that next sequence. For example, the customer panel, where you're going to want to see all 3 of the panelists as well as the moderator. So just be on the lookout for that. The function can be found in the top right-hand corner of your screen. There's a series of dots and it should say speaker view or view. You'll be selecting, at this time, it should be on speaker view. So if you could please make that adjustment now. So again, please no mic. Keep your video turned off, please. Use the chat function whenever you feel you'd like to, and please navigate between speaker view and gallery view according to the session presentations. I really want to just take a quick moment to thank our technology sponsors for really supporting this year's event. Our lead sponsor is True Commerce. Our supporting sponsors are IDEA, DLT Labs, Texas, CBSCA, as well as Raden. So thank you very, very much for being part of this program. And many of these technology providers will be part of the breakout sessions a little later on in the program. I would also be remiss without thanking our corporate sponsors, those you see on the screen. They have really been instrumental in allowing EFC to continue putting on these programs throughout the year. We've had many, many virtual webinars that we've been able to offer at no cost to our members this year. So again, thank you to our corporate sponsors for allowing us to make that possible. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Rick Posniak with Rexel Canada. Rick is my partner in crime on the Supply Chain Network. He is the chair of the network. And I would love to introduce you to Rick and take it away. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Swati. So good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending where you are. Welcome to the 2020 EFC Supply Chain Summit that we're calling the Digital Pivot. And the first time I've worn a tie in 7 months. That actually feels good. I want to thank everyone for dedicating half of their day in your packed schedule to join us for what should be a really good learning event and hopefully even a few aha moments. Swati mentioned, my name's Rick Posniak, and I've really had the pleasure of chairing the EFC Supply Chain Committee for the last couple of years. We're really proud to offer this event virtually and for free, thanks to our sponsors. The EFC team has done a wonderful job of looking after the setup of this event. There's a lot of moving pieces, especially with the breakout rooms and the multiple speakers. So really looking forward to a good afternoon of learning here. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about our committee here, a little bit of background. We were formed about 2 years ago after an important research paper by the EFC that showed that we really need more collaboration between partners if we're going to move the supply chain forward. And really the goals of the group are really simple. We form some great connections. We learn about new technologies from experts that we invite into our meetings. And we discuss possible solutions that our members can take back to their companies and possibly implement. So it's open to all EFC members and affiliate partners involved in just about every job function. That's one of the great things about this group. Very diverse group of people from distributors, manufacturers, solutions partners, and as well as many different job roles. So makes for a really big diverse group. It's open to everybody, and we really hope that even after today's session, if you see, if this interests you, that you join our team. And we do meet virtually once a quarter. So it allows, no matter where you're located in the country, it allows you easy access to the group. So send Swati an email if you're interested. So what do we, next slide, please. What do we really focus on as far as technologies? This graphic shows a real simple version of our supply chain. And of course, each organization has its own technologies intrinsic to its operations. It's ERP, it's finance and accounting systems, it's CRM. Those aren't really the technologies that we focus on with this group. Although many of us feel our technologies are a major source of competitive advantage, the reality is many of these technologies are dependent on how good your partners are as well with implementing those technologies and sharing data. So those are really the technologies we like to focus on. There are a few in there that are specific to an organization, but most of them are sort of partner-enabled technologies. For example, how do we optimize transactions between manufacturers and distributors? How can we standardize product data and the sharing of that data? How can we collaboratively manage inventory between two organizations and share data on transportation and logistics? Those are the technologies that this group really likes to focus on. So let's just get into the why you're here today, which is our program. Swati mentioned, it's really two distinct halves. The first half is really focused on what the customer is expecting out of our supply chain going forward. And we're lucky enough to have a great speaker who can really enlighten us on that, and then followed up with 3 customers who are really going to discuss what their views are on the future of the supply chain. So should be interesting. There is going to be some ability for you to ask some questions of that panelist. We are going to have a short Q&A after their session as well. We'll take a short break, 15-minute break, so you can get some work done or take a bio break, whatever you need to. And then we're going to get into the technology part of the program, where we, again, we have another fantastic speaker, Jack Shaw, who's a great speaker on, the future, what technologies will really affect the future, and even more importantly, how do you plan for them even amid a crisis? And we all know that's plans in the last year, many of them were tossed out the window. So very excited to hear about that. And then following that, we'll break you out into one of the 4 sessions that Swati talked about. Those will be for 35 minutes, and then we'll bring you back to the main room and close things up and give you a little more information on how to move forward. So looking forward to a great next 3.5 hours. And without any further rambling from me, we'll get things kicked off. So I'd like to, I'm very honored to introduce Mark Dancer as one of our featured speakers. Mark is an author and a true evangelist for innovation in the distribution and manufacturing industries. For over 30 years, he's worked with leaders to help develop strategies around innovation, and he's currently the founder and CEO of the Network for Business Innovation. I was first introduced to Mark's passion for business change. I bought one of his books back in 2005 titled Becoming a Digital Distributor, and a fantastic book. His books are really part of an ongoing series that he does every couple years to a series he calls Facing the Forces of Change. His latest book is called Innovate to Dominate, and really provides guidance on the discipline and practices organizations need to move forward in innovation and digital transformation. So, and after he's done speaking, he'll lend his expertise to hosting the customer panel. So, Mark, thanks very much for being a part of our event today, and the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Rick. I really appreciate the kind words in your introduction, and I'm very happy to be here today. I am going to talk about the digital pivot and the future of the supply chain from really 2 perspectives. One perspective is helping customers get their business to the future. I find in a lot of my work that manufacturers and distributors are very focused on how to transform their own business and its business model for the digital age. But really the best path for any company that wants to innovate and lead their market is to help customers get to their future, because customers' businesses, every customer's business is changing, just as our own businesses are changing. The other thing I'm going to talk about a lot today is about reinvigorating or updating the partnership that exists between manufacturers and distributors and agents as we work together as a supply chain to help customers get to the future. So I'm going to talk about helping customers get to the future, and I'm going to talk about the partnership in the supply chain. Perfect. And I'm going to start off with 3 quotes. These are 3 quotes that I use quite a bit to kind of get everybody in the mood of the conversation we're going to have. The first is by Tim Cook, Apple's CEO. Some thoughts he shared at a commencement address at MIT back in 2017, but still very valid today, and I think valid for the future. Tim Cook said that technology is capable of doing great things, but it doesn't want to do great things. It doesn't want to do anything. That part takes all of us. For me, the message here is, as we all think about things like artificial intelligence and blockchain and e-commerce and on and on and on, we're at a little bit of a disadvantage because many of us are not experts at those things. And it's very common and very easy to sit back and try to adopt what you're told are best practices for your business and for the supply chain. But that's not really the best path to the future. The best path to the future is to think about what we, the supply chain and our customers, what we want to do going forward, and then think about the technology and how it can enable that. Secondly, this is a quote by Clayton Christensen, author of The Innovator's Dilemma and Competing Against Luck, and many, many other publications. If you don't know Clayton, he actually recently passed this last year, but he's just a huge, huge thought leader and advocate for innovation and taught the world what disruption means. So when it comes to thinking about customers, Clayton Christensen offers that customers cannot always articulate what they want. Their motivations are more complex and their pathways to purchase more elaborate than they can describe, but you can get to the bottom of it. And I would add that as innovators in the supply chain, manufacturers and distributors and agents, it's really not the customer's job to tell us what they want. Our job, and on a later slide, I'm going to talk about how Clay Christensen recommends we do this. Our job is to kind of work with customers to jointly figure out the future and help customers move towards it. Next, this is a quote from Innovate to Dominate. And the full name of Innovate to Dominate is Innovate to Dominate, the 12th edition in the Facing the Forces of Change series. It's been published every 3 years by the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, all right, and their Institute for Distribution Excellence. So in that book, I quote more than 50 distributors at length. And the book is really written as a roadmap for innovation, not for distributors, but for manufacturers and their other supply chain partners. So I think this quote is particularly important as we get going. I think that there is an openness with suppliers, talking about it from the distributor perspective, to talk about new approaches. Lots of things are possible, but it starts with taking time out and asking what if. And to me, this quote means two things. One, I've worked with many manufacturers and many distributors over the years, and I'm thoroughly familiar with the partnership that exists between manufacturers and distributors. And I know that partnership is huge and strong and powerful and important, but I also know that there's sometimes friction, and sometimes there isn't as open and robust as conversation as there needs to be, particularly during change. And so what this distributor is saying is that right now we're at a point in time where there's a huge amount of openness. Distributors are willing to share, manufacturers are willing to share, agents are also, and we should do that. And we should begin our conversation about the future by asking, what if? So with that in mind, I'm going to take just a moment here and share a what if scenario, which is, what if your supply chain worked like a ride-sharing app? Now, this is I found about this perspective in an article written in Forbes by George Bailey, and he's the executive director and CRO of the Digital Supply Chain Institute. And at the bottom, you can see a link. I recommend you read the full article, but just, to kind of get our minds thinking in sort of an open and futuristic sort of way. Here's what I think he meant, right? Imagine it using Uber or Lyft, your ride-sharing app, right? And think about that as a supply chain. The first thing it does is it lets you say where you are and where you want to go, right? So what are your goals as an individual, or what are your goals as a business if it was your supply chain? You can see the available inventory, the cars that are there to serve you. You can get reviews on the individual drivers. You can pick the configuration of the car, which is analogous to a product or service from the supply chain. And then you say go, and you can see where the product is and how long it is away from meeting you at your location, which is delivery. You can see how long the promise is to get to where you want to go. That's the deliverable from the supply chain. You can see the route that the car will take, which is essentially the services that the supply chain is going to deliver for you, right? So this is kind of a customer-driven what-if analysis of the future. And if that future were to come to pass, if we were to really dig into this what-if analysis, we would be thinking about what that way to vision the supply chain, one among others perhaps, we'd be thinking about new metrics, new skills, new technologies. We'd be thinking about how we're going to collectively manage risk for the customer and risk for ourselves. And we talk about urgency because technology is changing things every single day. Or we talk about a relentless pursuit of customer happiness. So that's just a quick sidebar into a little bit of a what-if analysis. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give what I think is a 6-step roadmap for you to think about helping customers get to the future and reinventing or upgrading the partnership. And what-if analysis will be part of that. So I think that customers are a lifeline, but we need to look, listen, and lead. And this is actually, I've got the full quote on the right, but at the bottom, this distributor offered that as we think about helping customers get to the future, it's very important that we listen, experience, and help lead our customers forward, right? So help lead is just that. It's collaborating with a spirit of partnership with customers to get to the future, listening Clay Christensen in his book, and I'm just going to touch on it very lightly here, offers a methodology for working with customers to figure out their needs. It's called Jobs to be Done. It essentially asks you not to think about the products and services you can provide through the supply chain, but to think about what job they're actually hiring you for, right? Put it in that context. Talk about it as a job for which you are hired, for which the supply chain is hired. And then think about the circumstances that surround the customer's needs, not just their specific job and the specific task at hand, but everything else in their business and their life. And on and on and on. It's a very quick read. It's a very simple process, but extremely powerful, I think. And the last thing that this distributor said when he said, listen, experiment, and help lead customers, was the word experiment, right? Today, because we can mock up prototypes quickly through in apps and using technology, it's very important to think about whatever you decide you want to do with your supply chain, to experiment, to mock things up, to try things out. Think about putting up new solutions to your customers, not in terms of months and years, but in terms of days and weeks. And the only way you can get that is if you start experimenting with customers. The next 2 or 3 slides are going to draw on an article, and on this page, the graphic from a study that was commissioned by The Economist, and the link is again at the bottom. This graphic is just an intro. We could spend hours on this graphic, but what it really points out is 2 or 3 things, right? First, in the digital age, all of our customers are connected, right? And will be even more connected going forward. Secondly, on the right, it points out several of the technologies, and the percentages represent in that study, the number of executives that were embracing or trying to account for or leverage everything on this page. And what you see, there's big data, cloud computing, mobile apps. I would add blockchain. Jack Shaw is going to talk about that quite a bit after we're done. And in the bottom left, it talks about all the needs for different partnerships. Partnerships with other organizations in your industry, that might be the supply chain. Partnerships with universities, we need thought leadership. Partnership with employees and customers to develop new products and services. That could be part of the mission of our supply chain. And partnership with companies outside of your organization, right? Now, actually, let me go back and explain a little bit here what the headline meant. I said that the traditional distributor-supplier partnership is kind of killing the long-standing relationships that are established in the supply chain. What I mean by that is that our manufacturers' channel compensation programs, the authorizations and contracts they sign, the way that they communicate with their channels, all of those things were established 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they haven't been updated. And to the extent that the supply chain is evolving and needs to evolve, it's growing. And if we don't update those mechanics of channel management, it'll hold back our growth. It'll kill the supply chain. So now going forward, next few slides in this deck, having touched on the need to help customers get to the future, I'm now going to touch on 3 requirements for reinventing your supply chain in terms of the partnership, the collaboration that exists between distributors and agents and manufacturers in working with customers. They're part of the supply chain too, right? Let me say something I probably said a little bit earlier about my quotations, right? All the quotations on the left are essentially full quotations, although I've shortened them a little bit, that are in Innovate to Dominate. I'm not going to read the full quotation on every single page. I'm going to kind of highlight what I think the central point was, but it's there in full for you to go back and read it later. So you can, if you're listening to this talk and the whole event again, if you're looking at the deck, it gives you just a little bit more context for what that particular distributor said. I only have distributors because there are only distributor quotations in Innovate to Dominate, but it's really a roadmap for distributors and manufacturers and the value chain or the supply chain to evolve. Lastly, I don't name the distributors by their name and their company. That's not a secret. If you want to talk about it offline, I'll tell you who they are. If you happen to read it and Innovate to Dominate, there's full disclosure there. I'm just not giving the names and companies here because, you know, social media goes a little bit wild sometimes. What's important is what they have to say and not who they are at this point. And so I just don't want to, this probably wouldn't happen, but I'm just trying to avoid the chance that anybody who's kind enough to provide a quotation and help me do the research by Innovate to Dominate, I just don't want their name to get out there in some way that's not controlled. So requirement number one, right? We need towards a mutually powerful future supply chain based on digital collaboration, right? And the quotation on the left by the chief marketing and sales officer of this particular distributor says that their key challenge for innovation is speed. And I would offer that's all of ours challenge, right? Digital tools are transforming how business is done at a rapid and accelerating pace. And the forces of disruption that are coming from outside the industry, you know, those are happening every day and they're innovating every day. So whatever we do in the supply chain, in terms of our partnership, we need to think about how it makes us all success in our own business and how it helps the supply chain succeed in things we do together. There needs to be that mutualness of it. And perhaps one of the number one things we need to address is speed, right? So I've already said in my comment about how kind of the basic tenets of channel management have not been revised for the digital age. And here I just want to add another phrase to that, which is that precedents are a prison, right? If we don't, oftentimes the channel management organization in any company is way down in the organization. Channel management is not a board level or an executive level conversation. And so those precedents are powerful and they will exist. If the leaders of a company aren't addressing them, they won't get changed. So it's incumbent on all of our members, the agents, the distributors, the manufacturers, to say, let's put those channel management, which are really the rules of engagement inside of a supply chain, let's get them on the table. Let's examine why they did what they did when they were current and new, and let's think about how we can reinvent our contracts, our communication methods, our discounts, our rebates, our commissions. Let's think about how we do that. And my call to action here is when I've asked manufacturers, kind of out of the blue, are they doing that? They're kind of ambivalent sometimes. They have options. And when I ask distributors if they're leading, sometimes they say, oh, that's a manufacturer's job. So we really need to address the fact that the precedents we have in place around channel management, but really all of the other processes that guide our supply chain and our collaboration, all those precedents are a prison. And now I really like this article, again, last page, this page, next page, because it talks about how to create partnerships around digital collaboration, right? So, you know, the role of the supply chain is and always been to get products from the manufacturer through distributors and agents to customers, right? And we wrap a lot of value around that. But one of the core metrics and the way that we use to manage that supply chain is about the movement of the physical product. As the supply chain increasingly runs on data, that emphasis on, you know, inventory and where it's located, the physical inventory, that emphasis is going to be replaced by digital metrics and digital collaboration, right? We all need to become very skilled at things digital, right? And so the strength of this article is that it talks about partnerships around digital collaboration. It's not written for manufacturers and distributors. It's not written specifically for a supply chain. It's written for any company that needs to establish partnerships in the digital age, right? So in a sense, it's best in class, or it's what digital natives are thinking about how to partner, you know, companies that exist in the digital world, or how other industries are thinking about how partnering on digital collaboration. right? So it's kind of from outside our industry, but it offers at least three, and probably many more, really powerful ideas. One is that whatever we do with the supply chain and we do with our customers, one of our number one goals should be to figure out how the manufacturer and the distributor access the connected customer, right? So sometimes manufacturers and distributors argue over who has the relationship. Sometimes the word disintermediation is thrown out, which is manufacturers selling around customers, right? Channel conflict, distributors complaining about competition. We need to put all that aside and think about, if we're all going to be connected in the future, how do we jointly access the customer through digital means in a way which is very mutually beneficial? Second bullet point, again, it's all about speed. And I have to think about a specialization, right? I tell distributors they should never use the term value add. They should use the term value creation. The way to conceptualize the future value chain is not a manufacturer makes a product and a distributor adds value, agents play their role, and then we put that product on the landing dock of the customer. It's more about working side by side in the customer as opposed to a linear value chain, right? That's an ecosystem sort of way of viewing the value chain. Companies that think a lot about virtual marketplaces, which are called platform businesses, they think that those virtual marketplaces, one example is Amazon Business. They think that the platform business model is superior to the linear value chain and that it will replace us over time. Our challenge is to make that not happen, right? The last bullet here, I refer to digital natives. What's happening is that many of the companies or people that exist in the world of disruption that come from digital technologies that want to really do great things as an entrepreneur, many of them are thinking that, and they found out that B2B is hard. And so B2C is taken. They want to do great things in B2B, but it's hard. And so many of those really thought leaders and technology leaders are not thinking about disrupting and replacing the traditional value chain, because that's so super hard, but they want to offer disruptive services, disruptive databases, disruptive ideas, and join you in the quest to modernize the value chain. It's a very powerful concept, because if we're building our ecosystem, we should be reaching out to people that offer new ways to do warehousing, new ways to leverage data and analytics and artificial intelligence. Even companies that are creating virtual marketplaces, some of them want to do that to work in the way that the value chain works today. So we can make digital natives our partners in our value chain, all right? Another requirement, we need to build a culture of shared values, right? So over the years, I've learned that culture is an incredibly powerful tool for driving change or preventing change. And when I ask leaders in their organization, how do they define their culture and how do they manage their culture? Oftentimes I get an answer which is more or less crickets. They don't have a lot to say. Culture is basically the values that you espouse that are most important to your business. And then where it gets really powerful and really actionable, culture is the behaviors, the processes, the actions that most represent the things you want to accomplish. So on the left, I have a quote from a CEO of another industry association that has manufacturers, distributors, and in their world, contractors and consultants as members. And at the last sentence, she says that fostering collaboration is perhaps the number one goal for her industry association. And this association believes that if they can differentiate the value chain, our supply chain, from disruptors, if we all come together as the engaged members of the community and we work every day to break down barriers around collaboration. So collaboration should be one of the number one values as we think about working for the benefit of our customers and reinventing our partnership. On the right, I just have 4 ideas. Do this very quickly. You may have any others. about kind of new ideas. We're thinking about a thought process that can lead to the values, that can lead to the behaviors, that can lead to the new updated culture for our supply chain, right? So we want to reimagine what products are and what they do. As products are more and more wrapped in services or data, excuse me, as products are more and more wrapped in data and they're connected to their customers and their distributors, products are becoming services. Distributors are not resellers of products, but they're becoming service companies. Connections matter. Human connections, digital connections, everything matters. Business agility is super hard to achieve when in any one of your businesses, and working collaboratively in the supply chain, even more hard to believe. Disruptors have the advantage. If you just take Amazon Business as an example, everything that they need to have happen happens on their platform. They are in control. Everything that we need to have happen happens in our businesses all around Canada every single day, different people in different places. Agility is super hard to achieve as a supply chain. We also need to think about monetization, not compensation. This could be an hour or two discussion on its own. It's not about earning margins and get compensated for our business. The future supply chain is not about a manufacturer paying commissions, a manufacturer providing rebates, distributors and agents viewing that as the compensation that runs our business. It's more about how do we monetize our services? How do we monetize our data, which is good for the collective good of all of us, right? And kind of drives and encourages the investments in capabilities and technology. So it's kind of a game-changing thing. This article, again, touches on it, and maybe something we'd want to explore a lot as an association, as our members of the supply chain. All right. One comment and a quick wrap-up roadmap that I promised, and then we'll be off to the panel discussion in about 5 minutes or less. We're very much on track. So if we're thinking about the future, there's a couple thoughts I have. One is that there's this thing in innovation circles called foresight, right? And foresight, it's a learnable skill. It's got some kind of exact definitions, but I think of it as, can you stand up in front of an audience, your customers, your suppliers, your partners, and talk for 20 or 30 minutes about the future of your industry? If you have that, you have foresight. And if you have foresight, right, if you're really thinking about the future of your industry, the future of supply chain, and talking about it all the time, I think you'll come to the assessment that one of the core capabilities we all need to have, and the supply chain needs to have collectively, is about data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. It's the one ring to rule them all, if I can borrow from Lord of the Rings, right? And so I have a quote here from a distributor who's kind of taken this to heart. And in the middle of it, there's a sentence that says, our customers are wanting to run at peak performance. So they're asking us more and more than ever to provide predictive insights, right? Customers want predictive insights. That's the powerful contribution of this distributor. He's not saying that customers want more and better products. They want that. He's not saying that customers want more and better services, fulfillment, delivery, advice, everything else. Of course, customers want products. Of course, customers want service. What this distributor is trying to figure out, and to bring in their supply chain partners along with them, is how can we provide predictive insights to our customers? It's about sharing knowledge. It's about talking about the future. It's about talking about foresight. That's what customers want, because you can't predict the future in the end, but you can be ready when it arrives. Okay, last comment, or last slide, excuse me. This is the roadmap I promised. I think when Jack Shaw does his very excellent discussion later, he's going to offer processes and versions of roadmaps and things that are very valuable and things that you should use. Here, I want to talk about my suggested roadmap, 6 steps, in the context of, as I've said, many times, hopefully, throughout these 25 or 30 minutes, I think our goal for the supply chain, our unifying goal, should be about helping our customers get to the future, right? Every single customer of our supply chain is facing challenges and has the same uncertainties we do about their business, we should help them get to the future. We also need to reinvent our partnership. The basic collaboration, rules of engagement, assumptions, conscious and subconscious assumptions have been in place, and we need to consciously think about how to reinvent the partnership and make them modern again. So I propose conversations and work around 6 things. 1, establish a charter, goals, required outcomes, who's participating, what are their roles, what's the level of commitment, what are timing, funding, and governance considerations. Spend a lot of time, if you as an organization, you as a supply chain are going to launch an initiative, make sure you have a charter, overall charter for your efforts and for every single sub-effort beneath that. We need to have a work stream around, or some thinking put into how can we work to imagine the future of business for our customers, maybe using Clayton Christensen's principles. We need to imagine how the markets are going to operate in the future. As more and more business is done virtually, as more and more business is done using artificial intelligence and robots and data, right? We can't control the markets really, but so we need to think about how the markets might evolve and how our supply chain needs to evolve with it. We need to identify essential capabilities, things that we can invest in now in our individual businesses, and maybe somewhere, capabilities that we build that the supply chain can collectively draw on. Start building this now so we're ready when the future arrives, and start developing the things that are harder and the things that are less certain over time. We need to build an innovation ecosystem. Essentially, the supply chain is an ecosystem, right? But things are changing every day, and the supply chain needs ideas, it needs services, it needs thought leadership, it needs expertise. This is a growing awareness too for industry associations that far beyond providing annual events, they can actually work every single day to help their members, and in this case our supply chain, build an innovation ecosystem. An ecosystem is a best practice for innovative companies. When I was researching Innovate to Dominate, I found that companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google, and they're all using innovation ecosystems. They're skilled practitioners at that. They've been doing it for many years, but when I ask many manufacturers and many distributors, have they built an innovation ecosystem? They are not. And the last point is we need to we need to walk before we run. We need to, actually do things now. And so what I encourage is to look for opportunities to actually start collectively acting on data as a supply chain, and to redefine the processes, both conscious and unconscious, formal and informal, that will help the supply chain operate in the future, right? Collect and act on data, right? Precipitate the processes and things we can do now and use them, right? Don't make it all theoretical, right? Do it. That's my presentation. I think I'm finishing pretty much exactly on time. And so we're going to transition to the panel now. There's a little bit of setup going, and then I will kick things off. Our 3 panelists should be unmuting and turning on your video. Okay, so what I'm going to do to kind of kick off our panel discussion is let me give everybody the plan first. Oh, I'm sorry, Swati, did you have anything, or anybody have anything you want to say as I kick things off here, just to make sure? Swati, you're muted.
I think we're ready to roll. In just a few minutes, we'll be asking everybody to put the view into gallery view so that you're able to see the panelists.
Excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to do to kick things off, just to give everybody the game plan, is I'm going to ask in a moment, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, to say what their business is and what it does, what their specific responsibilities are, maybe a little bit of their supply chain management experiences. So we'll do that very, very quickly. Then after that, I am going to just kind of put on the table what I think the theme of our discussion is, and then we'll be into it. I will ask the members of the audience to, if you have questions, to share them through the chat feature. We will save some time at the end for a Q&A, and those chats will be a big part of it. And I will also ask our panelists, after I give our theme and I kind of really kick off our discussions, please bear in mind that, don't feel like you have to get everything you have to say out all at once. If you find yourself going long, stop, we'll come back to you, right? And the goal of our panel is actually to let every single panelist, our customers, share their thoughts, but also to have a good active dialogue amongst us. So without any further ado, I'll ask maybe Wael, if you can introduce yourself, and then Terry, and then Martin. Please unmute yourself and go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience. Wael, if you'd go first, that would be terrific. And I'm watching, and I don't think that you've unmuted yourself. And neither has Terry or Martin, I think. I'm not quite sure. There we go, Wael. And Terry and Martin, you can also go ahead and unmute yourself and show your video if you haven't done it already. So Wael, would you please go ahead and introduce your business, yourself, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. And first of all, very delighted to join the forum today. A fantastic opportunity. And also thanks for the very informative presentation. It has been absolutely, very, very insightful. My name is Wael Safat. I work for Black & McDonald. I'm the head of procurement, looks after North America. For those who are not aware or familiar with Black & McDonald, we are a construction, utility, and facility management organization. We got a footprint across North America. We are coast to coast in Canada and also in the United States. And again, once again, thanks for having me today as part of this distinguished panel.
Excellent. Thank you, Wael. I really thank you for joining us. And I know we've talked a little bit beforehand, and I think your contributions as well as Terry and Martin's are going to be excellent. So thank you for being here. Terry, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Mark. I'm Terry McSwain from TM3. We're primarily a utility contractor based in Southwestern Ontario. And my role within the organization is I'm a project manager. And within our organization, we look after all aspects of any project that we're responsible for. So right from initial of the tendering project, right through to the purchasing of material, and then obviously the closing out of the project. And I think within our organization, we're really looking at each step of our organization and how can we digitize that part of our organization. So I think the supply chain is a very important part, and further in our discussion, we'll talk about that a little bit further.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry, very much. Martin, if you would introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. My name is Martin Perrier. I'm the Strategic Sourcing Director for Hydro-Québec here in Montreal, responsible for mainly all procurement that we're doing for our distribution, production, and transmission business. So it's roughly spending of around 3 billion Canadian dollars per year. And responsible for all contracts, but also a very good link with all logistic. So I think that the discussion we'll have all together today will be very interesting for me and for us, I believe. Being involved in supply chain since more than 25 years, so I'm delighted to be with you guys today. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So I'm going to share kind of the theme for our panel discussion. And then a quick heads up, to get things off, I'll ask Martin and then Terry and then Wael in kind of reverse order, just to share your initial thoughts, right? And we'll do that in that order, Martin, then Terry, then Wael, kind of the first time. And then after that, we'll just a little bit of a free-for-all. We'll go back and forth, right?
Yeah.
So the overall theme for this conversation, and this is for the audience too, to make sure you're listening in, I want to kind of make sure that we kind of surface from the customer perspective, what are the gaps in the supply chain? What's missing in it? And then what do customers need, either to fulfill those gaps or just, what's important to your business? So we might get into better partnering, collaborations, different capabilities, innovations, Buy Canada, whatever the topic is. I don't want to say those are the topics, but if we can just kind of talk about gaps and needs, we'll have a very effective kind of panel and really kick off a great conversation for the supply chain. So Martin, with that in mind, if you can kind of share your thoughts, that would be terrific.
Yeah, first of all, that's good because you're talking about Buy Canada. That's something that, you know, I've written down here because that's an important point, because just a couple weeks ago, I've been asked how much are we buying from Canada? And, you know, that's mailing address, it's maybe easy to follow. But after that, coming from the manufacturer or the distributor, where exactly the components are coming from, is it from the US, China, or everywhere else in the world? It's very difficult to find out, and this information is not really readily available. But going back to the main subject, Mark, what is very important for me, and I guess for us, is the communication process. Is right now we're interacting with thousands of suppliers at Hydro-Quebec, and we're having a multitude of platforms. Sometimes it's electronic, sometimes we're using their system, sometimes it's our system, sometimes it's a different system, and all of those systems are not talking together. You were talking earlier about, you know, a bit the Amazon profile or business that they're having. It's very difficult. You know, when I'm looking for a product, a specific product today, and you know, I'm having a contract, a partnership with a supplier, and I realize that they don't have it. After that, it's just like I need to redo the same thing all over again with somebody else on a different platform. Everything about inventory as well is quite difficult. Everything touching also the accuracy of the inventory, because sometimes they're saying, well, we have the part in stock and they'll be delivered to you between 48 to 24 to 48 hours. And after that, we realize that the part is not available anymore. So the accuracy of the information, the accuracy of the data is really key. And since we're involved in the distribution portion as well, then when we're having outages or we're having problem on the network, obviously we need to have the equipment, the parts readily available. And for that, we need to stock, because that's the only way that we believe at this point that we can have the part available at any point in time. So we're investing a lot on the inventory. And I guess in 2020, we can do things differently. But sometimes I believe all the distributors or the supplier, they're not at the same level as we would like to be.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to let everybody get their thoughts on the table, and then we'll ask each other questions, and I'll ask some questions. So Terry, if you could maybe give your kind of kickoff comments on gaps and needs, that would be terrific.
I'd like to follow up with Martin's point. I think there's a huge gap between the access of information and the easy access of it. And the point of, you know, the Uber driver, where you can log in, you can see your driver. I feel like that's where supply chain needs to move. So we need to be able to log in. I can find that product. I mean, everyone's first response nowadays when you're looking for something, what is it? You go to Google and type it in and you find it. I think the access for suppliers, or for at least the end users as a contractor or whoever, the ability to log in, find the product, find where that product's available, is a huge time saver, cost saver for everybody. You know who has a product, you're not making 20 or 30 phone calls to find that product. You know who has it, you know the inventory. And I know we have our own inventory here as well. And I know there's challenges around accurate inventory across all inventory platforms, I think, as it is a challenging process, but at least to know who may have that product so you can start where you need to go. And then the backside of that is the ability, especially I know in our organization, the ability to extract whatever you've purchased out of that system and be able to now upload that into your own system. And I know in our organization, like I said, we're really looking at each section or each part of our organization and how can we digitize that part of our organization. And I think at the end, one of our goals as an organization is to work with suppliers and say, okay, can we export out of your system in whatever format that is, take it from there, and then now upload it right into our system. And we started that with our payroll system, which is now an export import number one, it's a lot more cost efficient. It's an export and an import. It's one person doing that job. Number two, the accuracy of that information going into your system is very high, because now you're taking out the human error point of it. And we found it's really driven down a lot of our issues of finding out what's going on or looking into certain things. Now that's very accurate information. So I think from our standpoint, one, ease of access to get that information or to find the product. And then number two, extracting that information from a supplier and uploading it into our system. And I think that takes a lot of collaboration, but I think across any customer, whoever it is, as long as you can export out into any file format, they can use that information whatever the way they want.
Excellent, excellent. A lot of common themes emerging. I've made notes, but also, for Weil and Terry and Martin, think about the questions we're going to share, obviously, going forward. But think about, if you have questions for each other, just raise your hands, because my questions may not be the best questions for getting your point across. Weil, would you like to kind of share your thoughts on gaps and needs in the supply chain?
I think, thanks, Martin and Terry, fantastic insights. I think, in my view, there are 4 areas that I would love to bring forward with regards to the challenges. I think the first one, we have to really change the philosophy of looking to the supply chain. It must be perceived as a value chain. So, and that's really important. I think prior to the pandemic, if you would have called people and you said, we're all in this together, no one will buy into it. But with the understanding that with the pandemic, we're all in this together, and in order for organizations, suppliers, manufacturers, contractors, and clients to survive, we need to have a proper connectivity. So I would love to take it one step back in terms of connectivity, that we have to have different channels in terms of engaging and collaborating. That's the first point. The second aspect, you will typically find there's always a lack of ability to articulate the value. Why should you leverage the distributor versus the manufacturer? Why should I go to the manufacturer versus the supplier? So I think if we across the entire supply chain network, if we're able to articulate the value creation for each of the participants, that even will create more transparency, and in fact will encourage people to collaborate, as each participant in the network will have a unique value proposition. And accordingly, I would have a clear understanding what is the best time and the best approach to engage directly the manufacturer versus the distributor versus the vendor, etc. So that's the second one. So connectivity. Second aspect, it's a value creation and articulating the value. The third element, it's about risk management. We tend to understand whether you work for a public organization, work for a private organization, even for non-for-profit organization, how we better manage the risk. And the idea here is not only the business continuity in terms of having the inventory in place so I can really ensure operational sustainability, but more important, repetition of risk, diversity and inclusion. There's so many bigger risks that we are facing today, whether from sourcing, from supplier management, from market fluctuation, from geopolitical issues that we have collectively to manage. The last element which I see that in order to do to be able to connect effectively, have a value chain, effective risk management, you need to have different skill sets and different competencies for the procurement professional and supply chain professionals. Without having people who are very strong in analytic, ability to collaborate, ability to engage, thinking differently, it is unlikely that you will be able to move forward aggressively.
Excellent, excellent. So I've taken a few notes here, and some of the things that were shared across all of us are kind of more strategic in a sense and visualizing things differently. But one of the things that came up in all 3 comments, which is very, in my experience, is very often a very current pain, is about data and information, right? So being able to see where the inventory is, when you're going to get it, being able to download information into your business systems, having, you deal with lots of different suppliers perhaps, right? If there's some confusion or differences in the way you access information across those suppliers. So I'd like to throw it back to the group here a moment and just say, on this very real, very topic, very real, very current topic of having the data that you need to access products and services in the supply chain, are there any real gaps or problems or war stories, anything you want to share or a specific recommendation? Let's kind of get, a little bit specific here on the problem or the solution around getting access to data and information. Does that make sense? And does anybody have anything to share? Kind of raise your hand or just jump in. Go ahead. I might take it right back to Martin since you led off with this and that was your comment. Maybe you can just dig a little deeper into data and information accuracy and inventory, those sort of things, and make sure that the supply chain understands what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest problem that we're facing is, we're trying, if I'm just going back, let's say just a little bit here to explain the process. I'm talking with the operation, I'm talking with people from project, and after that they will give me forecasts, which is one of the key points for me. I need forecasts. After the forecasts, I'm going out with my team to find suppliers, and obviously finding the best quality at the best price. But also I need to organize something that I'll be able to buy some of the part number maybe that are out of the contract, because planning and forecasting is going up to a certain limit, but I won't be able to plan for everything. So I'm working really hard with my team, with supplier, with distributors, with manufacturer to sign a contract. But when a contract is signed, and after that there is many people that probably will buy from this contract for different project, for operation or for maintenance and stuff like that. Nobody are on the same page. I would say they don't have the same understanding of the contract, of the delivery, of the availability of the part, and the contract to some extent, what they can buy and what they can't buy on this contract. So this is creating some internal confusion. But after that, with the supplier or with the distributor, there's also some confusion as well, because they will order something and the parts are not available and stuff like that, and they will have to pay expedite fees and stuff like that they don't understand that it's not part of the contract. So the follow-up of the contract, even on our side, but on the other side as well, from the distributor or the manufacturer, is not consistent. And the platform that we're using is also very different from one supplier to the other. Like for us at Hydro-Québec, we're on SAP, like many of you guys, I believe, and we're moving next year towards a new version called S4 HANA. And in this version, they're telling us that, maybe they'll be more interactive, that I didn't have the chance to see it yet. But I don't think that the majority of our suppliers will be able to connect with our own system. So we'll have to work with a different system in parallel. But like I was saying earlier, with more than 1,000 suppliers under contract, I won't be able to go on 1,000 platforms to find my parts.
Any thoughts on, Terry or Wild, any comments that you'd like to add in on this or questions?
I think one of the biggest gaps across is the easy access of information. I think the information is out there. It's how does the end user access that information? Where is it? Where is it stored? How do we easily find whatever we are looking for, whatever that may be? And, whether it's a central, like I use Amazon, like you talked about, Amazon is a central database. I can go on there and I can type in anything I want to find in the world and it's on there. And from our industry, that it's almost not possible to find, like, and I know it's harder said because it's hard to do amongst all the distributors or maybe all the manufacturers, but the ability to be able to find, or the easy access to information to find products, whatever you're looking for, I think that benefits the end user huge, because you can go and say, hey, I need this product, you type it in, you find it, you call this person, they have the product or whatnot. So it's getting the easy information or the easy access to information that really benefits the end user.
It seems to me that, and thinking about, working with supply chains, value chains, distributors and manufacturers over years, delivery, on-time delivery, accurate delivery, was kind of a point of differentiation between suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors. But as information is more and more available, so you can see where the inventory is, you can see level performance, it's almost like the supply chain should move towards providing easily accessible and usable and downloadable data is a commodity, meaning that everybody does it, everybody is accurate, and maybe the industry moves towards the customers articulating, you know, standards. This is what we expect across all of our suppliers. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit, and while I'm going to throw out a comment that you shared about thinking about the supply chain as a value chain, right? And you talked about connectivity and how do we articulate that value, right? So value to me is you know, services sold or just services provided, but it's also about creating value, right? So it's not about delivering products, it's about creating value in the customer's business and then measuring that value. So while maybe you can dig a little bit deeper into what you think about the supply chain as a value chain, and then Martin and Terry, you can kind of chime in. That would be great.
Thank you, Mark. I think as I mentioned earlier, probably I will quote a couple of words from your presentation. Typically, in my view, I mean, customer and supplier manufacturer, they have to partnership really in terms of driving innovation. And this is where the discussion should start. Everyone defines value very differently. I mean, we can take the transactional element of value on the supply chain in terms of, I mean, the right delivery on the right time, on the right location. That's really on the transactional side. But it is more importantly, I mean, it's how you define the value within your value chain, the supply chain. Who is the ultimate end user? And what typically, exactly, I mean, what typically really is needed by the end user. So this is how the discussion should take place. What I find really very difficult, and we've been working with a number of key strategic partners, is to work together to articulate what does it mean value creation. So given an example, as a contracting company, the ability for us really to win more bids, this is one of the value in terms of a business growth, in terms of engagement. The ability, I would say, to have more productivity, which is obviously a translation that we get the material on the right time, on the right place, with the least effort in place. That's productivity. What is always missing that in order to get the right value, you have to tie up this with measures and KPIs, and you have to tie up this with the bottom line. So given an example, if I'm really partnering with one particular manufacturer and supplier in terms of delivery of particular product, how this will increase efficiency, how I can measure efficiency here in terms of benchmarking within the organization, within the industry, how this will help me really, I mean, to improve the bottom line by reducing or optimizing the operating costs. So defining the value chain without having the measure and without linking the measure to the bottom line, it is unlikely you will get the right engagement, in my view. And in our organization, I want to circle back to the comment earlier by Martin and Terry about data. There's a lot of data. I think the key success factor is to focus what data that you are looking for. We try to take in our organization a more proactive approach in terms of developing a very, very sophisticated analytic platform and having a predictive analytics. So when the opportunity comes for our project team or operation team, we provide them with the landscape rather than waiting for them. We tend to provide them, okay, this is the current landscape, this is the key distributor or key supplier or key partner, this is the key product and material that you have been working on, and this is where you may have an opportunity. And this is help them to drive the discussion.
Excellent. Excellent. Hey, a note to our audience, in about 5 minutes, we're going to start off the Q&A. So if you have questions, please submit them in chat, and Swati will see them and she'll ask them of us. So value is sometimes in the eye of the beholder, but we've got 3 customers here, right? So Martin and Terry, go whatever order you want, but if you were to look at the supply chain and the value it creates today, and new value it could create for you in the future, or better value it could create for the future, or however you want to define it. If we were going to move to the future with a digital supply chain that is all about value for customers, what would the priority be? Whoever wants to go first.
But I can go, Mark. On us, value is making sure when we're having outages or problem with the network that I'll be able to have my guys to go on the field and do the repair as soon as possible. Because actually there's 3 things here that will create value. We're trying to sell electricity at the end of the day. So when we're having outages or a problem with the system, just for the time that we're doing the work, or the time that will take to wait for the part and to move at the place, where there's damages, will take several hours. And actually, we're not selling electricity during those times. So most likely I'll need parts in every parts of the province. And sometimes that can be very, very remote places. So inventory is quite important. And if for reason I don't have the part in stock and I need to find it right away, I can tell you that a good supply chain will help me to find the part rapidly, and this will create a lot of value for us. So
Excellent.
inventory management also.
Terry, thoughts to add?
Yeah, I agree with Martin. It's funny because we kind of run the same business. So yeah, the value of having that part or knowing where that part is, or the value of, I think a lot of it, like I said, goes back to having the value of that information. Can we have easy access to the information is a huge value to, I know, our organization. And then also the value of, like YL said, taking that information and now what's important to your organization and utilizing that within your organization. And every organization is a little bit different, but I think in today's world, the data or the information is out there, it's getting it out, and however you want to choose to use it as an organization, you choose to use it as an organization.
Excellent. So I have 2 comments, and then we'll kind of go to the Q&A section here. One is just a kind of how to use these conversations. I think we have 3 customers here. They're sharing incredible insights. I once worked with a company, a different industry, who went out and recorded their customers, and then they formed different teams inside of their own business and very cross-functional teams to listen to what the customers had to say in small groups. And what they found was that they had multiple teams, multiple functions. Everybody heard something different, right? And then they went back to the customer and said, "We thought we heard this. Did you mean that?" And I think that these virtual conferences are a great way to kind of launch that kind of initiative. Second thing is, at the very beginning, we talked about Buy Canada, local supply chain, and risk. And this is just an observation on my part. At the start of the COVID crisis, there was a lot of thinking about how global supply chains were going to shorten, right? And buying locally was going to be a bigger requirement for customers because of the risk associated that the COVID crisis kind of pointed out, right? And at the time, I thought that, the distribution-centric supply chains, right, which we're all part of here, right, are local in their nature, right? Some of the products may come from overseas, but the manufacturers selling to distributors who are still primarily local are very local businesses. And I don't think I've seen an industry come out and say, if you want to manage your global supply chain risk with local partnerships between manufacturers and distributors, we're here for you. That's what we're about. And I've always thought that's kind of a missed opportunity, right? Just my kind of observation. We are a local supply chain, and we can get better at it and help our customers manage their risk because we're local. And a lot of the things we do going future may kind of reinforce to mean, what does it mean to be local in the digital age, right? It used to be that manufacturers had distributors because they lived in a market and they understood demand and they had product down the street and they could answer questions with somebody down the street. That's the old definition of local. I think there could be a new definition of local. So, hey, we can comment on that, but I'm going to ask Swati, do you have any questions from the audience for us?
I sure do.
Excellent.
Great.
Have
All right.
at it. Put us on the spot.
Excellent. Great. I have a question in the queue here from a distributor who's asking, all 3 of you mentioned that access to information about the products you buy is critical. Are you yourselves as customers building the capabilities in your own systems to host that information about the products so that it is more readily available, and expect suppliers to populate the data in your system? Maybe Martin, I'll start with you. So from your own perspective, what platforms are you building that
That's a very good question. And first of all, just make sure everybody understand, I can tell you that already some suppliers are very good with system, and we're having very good collaboration. So actually what I'm saying, I'm talking generally, but you know, at Hydro-Québec, it's a huge corporation. We're having more than 20,000 employees, and I'm not responsible for IT. So each and every time we're looking for a new platform. And actually, you know, what is funny is that sometimes internally supply chain is not our own core business. So we're investing more money on other systems to manage electricity. But since a couple years, I think that now they're looking at us and they're ready to invest. So to answer the question, are we ready internally? In some cases, yes, but in some other cases, no. So there's still some work that needs to be done internally. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Wael, what any thoughts on that particular question from you?
Yes, it's indeed a great question. And I think we've looked into this very differently within the organization. So we built, first of all, a governance for data. Who owns the data? And this is really important, because actually owning the data will drive a number of discussion internally and externally. The second element, who is managing the data in terms of, ensuring that you have an accurate data, a compatible data, and relevant data. And the third one, how are we going to connect these data to the right source? Typically, we would love to connect with all our suppliers, but unlikely we will have the effort and the expertise to do this. What we should try to do, again, to focus on our key strategic partner. And back to Martin's point, that some of the supplier or key players, they have very cutting edge in technology, and we try to leverage them. Some of them, they still really build on the capability. So this is part of the roadmap. You have to have a roadmap. You have to focus and align on your key strategic partner, where you need to invest the time and the effort. And accordingly, you start really seeing the benefits of integrating within their system and getting a consistent and compatible data between the two sides.
Very good. Thank you, Wael. Terry, do you have anything else to add from your side?
I know as our organization, I mean, we have built stuff around the data, so we know different data, but we're really looking for suppliers to house that data. And I think the part of that is it's more accurate when it's housed by a supplier. And it's hard for us to, like, we're not as an organization to house all the data for every different supplier that we have. So we're really looking for the suppliers to manage that data, and us just export out of their systems.
Okay. So this next question is really a lead into, while I think what you and Terry were referencing, when it comes to the data that your organization is managing, who in your company is responsible for making sure that the product information is up to date? Wael, maybe I'll start with you.
There's no, again, it's another great question. I think there is no right answer to the question. Some organization, they may have a centralized function that looks after the entire data. And think about it, when we talk about supply chain data, it's not the product, it's a procurement data, it's a financial data, it's inventory data, it's a production planning data, it's a demand management data. So you've got an enormous stakeholder part of it. What we've done in our organization, as I mentioned earlier, that we built the governance model. We identified the key processes across the organization. We assign a particular ownership for those processes, and we have a functional responsibility for particular. So giving an example, procurement and supply chain will own all the procurement data across the enterprise in collaboration with other functions. Could be finance, could be production, could be operation, etc., etc. And this is typically allowing you really, first of all, to have an accountability, who's looking after the data. Secondly, I have an ownership in terms of initiating the right discussion internally and externally. Thirdly, you'll be having the ability to build a business case if there is a need to integrate or have, I would say, having a technology and connectivity between the organization and its key suppliers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good recap. Martin, anything else you wanted to add?
But I would say on this is, You know, like just to give you another example, let's say that, you know, right now we're having obviously installation up north in James Bay. And for us, we need to keep a lot of inventory because obviously if there's a outage or there's problems or, you know, we won't have any distributors around. So we're building a lot of inventory just in case. And sometimes internally we don't have the right data, so there's a couple of person down there that they know, yes, we're having this part or that part, and what we realize is that sometimes they call us because they need something urgent, and finally 2-3 days after that they realize that the part was already there but wasn't in the system. So there's still a lot of things that we need to do internally with engineering, with people from project, but also with people responsible for maintenance. So it's not, but each and every time that we're buying a part, after that, we're having the information. But after that, to know or to understand the forecast, it's a bit more difficult.
Absolutely, thank you. And Terry, you know, you mentioned that the reliance really is on the supplier, but within your own organization, is there sort of that mandate or that responsibility?
Yeah,
And who
so
would
within
that
our
be?
organization, when we typically set up a process, initially there's a team that's put together to develop that process. And then once the process is developed, we sign ownership to somebody to manage that process. So there'll be a specific person within our organization that would be responsible for keeping up with updates or whatever that may be. And again, that's just, we decide that if one person is responsible for it, it's typically will get done, as opposed to if you have multiple people responsible for it, sometimes it's not someone's priority and whatnot. So we really look to assign ownership. Similar to what I said, we really look to assign ownership or responsibility to individuals for different processes within our organization.
Okay. This question is a bit of a comparative question. So when you think about the electrical industry and the supply chain or the value chain that our suppliers and our channel really provide to you as support, how does the electrical channel compare to some of the other markets that you work with, including HVAC and plumbing and others? Are we leaders or are we laggers when you think about the plumbing and HVAC and other markets that you would work with? Martin, maybe I'll start with you on that question.
I would say that we're probably lagging a little bit. That's what I'm thinking about that. I know for us there's something which is difficult for us as well as the all the homologation process that we're following internally. Sometimes there's only one supplier that is having the homologation for that part. But obviously us in supply chain, we're trying to have different homologation to make sure that we can work with several distributors or manufacturer for a certain part number. I'll give you an example. You know, Mark, you were talking about having more a resilient and a local supply chain. Maybe some of you are maybe aware that we, during the crisis a couple months ago, we had a strike in the Port of Montreal. So the strike lasted for several weeks and had a lot of stock in containers stuck in the port for several weeks. So I can tell you that I was looking around to find a second source in North America and to make sure that those parts can be delivered by train, by plane, or by truck, but coming from North America. Everything coming from Europe is coming in via Port of Montreal. So that's also something which is very difficult for us because sometimes doing a second homologation that'll cost a lot of money engineering wise, but after that will secure my supply chain for the many years to come. So that's also something which is quite I would say quite difficult for us. But going back to your question, maybe in the HVAC, and I'm not an expert in that domain, but there is more, I believe, readily available parts that can be used on the system.
I see. Okay. I'm actually just going to move on to a few more questions because we have quite a few to go through, and I know we have about 5 minutes left. This question comes out a lot when we have our supply chain network meetings, as well as a lot of the HR network meetings that EFC holds. What skill sets are truly required in your organization, as well as the organization of the suppliers, to really help create value across your supply chain? Terry, maybe I'll start with the question with you. What skill sets are you looking for internally, as well as with your supplier partners?
I know internally we're, like I think I said before, we're really looking to digitize our processes. And we've been looking for, especially with like new people coming to our organization, what sort of out of the box thinking do they have that can help transform our organization? And I think as a whole, contractors are a bit behind in the digital world. And I think we're really looking, and I think all the organizations are really looking, how can we really move forward with digitizing a lot of our processes? And, we've taken leaps and bounds as an organization. We're not there yet, but, reducing the amount of paper we're using. How are we getting information from the field staff into our organization? Because it's always a disconnect. And I think a lot of organizations with the pandemic are starting to see now, like, we have people all over the province working, and same as YL. And how do you get that information back to a central spot so you can deal with it? And we've been really looking for people with some outside the box thinking of digitization within our organization.
Okay, thank you, Terry. YL, so aside from, digital skill sets and the out-of-box thinking, any other skill sets that sort of come to mind for you?
I think recently, and particularly with the pandemic, we've noticed a big shift from what we call functional and leadership skill into more soft skills. And I will try to frame the competency of soft skills in terms of emotional intelligence, obviously. And you think about it, in order to elevate any of those discussions, you need someone who's very good in collaborations and someone who's been able to sell the value proposition. Trust me, as a client, as an end user, we need to sell the value proposition even internally within our organization, even to sell it to some of our external partner, etc. So to be able to elevate this discussion and have the right level of collaboration, and to Terry's point of view, out of the box discussion, you need first, in my view, 3 skill sets, or I'll say 3 out of 1. Self-awareness. People have to understand really their limitation, their strengths, and they have to continuously work around those. 2, resilience, which has obviously been mentioned earlier by Martin and Mark, and etc. So resilience. The third one, which I believe extremely become very critical, empathy. The way that you engage and collaborate, even when we talk about materialistic value chain in terms of product and digitization, but the empathy of understanding the challenge, the empathy of coming with a solution, I think those 3 together will drive a better collaboration and a better results, in my view.
Absolutely. And just a quick aside, EFC did develop a talent research report just last month, and those core areas, YL and Terry, as you mentioned, are all embedded within that report. So go to electrofed.com and you can definitely download a copy of that, the latest research on that. Martin, anything else you wanted to add to sort of further that?
But just on my side, what is also very important, having people, they think outside of the box, but they also can make the link between a long negotiation with a supplier or with a distributor, because at one point we need a contract and there is some liabilities, then there's some warranties, there's many things behind that. But the majority of those contracts are not just procurement contract, are more like services contract, because we're looking for inventory, we're looking for overnight services and stuff like that. And sometimes it's not only having the delivery to a hub, but it's a delivery to the point of use. So there's many more things that we're asking to the suppliers. So I'm looking for people that they can make the link between something more theoretical, like a contract, going directly on the field. How can we use it? And having people that can make the link between a contract and the logistic aspect is quite important for us.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are a couple of other questions that have come in through the queue. So maybe what I'll do, Mark, is following this summit, I can send an email to all 4 of you, just a few of those outstanding questions, and if I could just have some responses. And what I will do is next week, Daniela DeMarco from EFC will be sending out a roundup email, which includes a recording of this presentation as well as all the other presentations being delivered today. And I'll include the Q&A for those outstanding questions. So again, I thank everybody. Thank you very, very much for participating as part of this panel discussion. And Mark, as well as to you for really helping to sort of lead the herd and getting some of these voices and perspectives shared with our audience. One of the things I really value from this talk is understanding the customer perspective. And through the supply chain network meetings, I think Rick Posniak and I are both aligned with having more customers present to our group, because we really do need to understand sort of the end user perspective as well as the customer's perspective. And Mark, you talked about the roadmap. That's something we definitely will share with the network as well as the wider membership. I love the idea of the charter, having some sort of an industry agreement, benchmarks, while you spoke about, and sort of what does that look from an industry macro level, and perhaps even a certification program of some sort. So thank you all very, very much for participating. I'm really, really pleased to have all of you take part in today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Swan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for everybody else, thanks for hanging tight. I know there's been a lot of information shared over the last little while, but we're not done yet. We still have a very informative and engaging program coming up next after the break. In a few minutes, we're going to leave for a 15-minute break. I ask that everybody please come back by 2:45, but I ask that you please do not log off of Zoom, because during this break is when I'm going to put you all into breakout rooms. I did receive some feedback from many of you in terms of what room you would like to be placed in, but I will do my best to sort of honor that, but please do not log off, because I will have to sort of allocate rooms accordingly. Coming up right after the break, we have Jack Shaw, who's going to take us through some of the new technologies that we're beginning to see in the digital space. It really is, I've seen his presentation, it is really, really groundbreaking and riddled with innovative ideas. So please stay tuned. I ask everybody to come back at 2:45 and we will continue the session. Again, please don't log off. Thank you very much, everyone. See you soon.
My name is Scott Kleinert. I'm with True Commerce, one of the sponsors of today's event. And I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Jack Shaw. Jack is an innovation and technology strategist with over 30 years experience helping leaders transform their organizations to anticipate and manage strategic disruptions. Jack has advised key decision makers at such Fortune 500 organizations as Mercedes-Benz, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, Oracle, and SAP. His decades of experience designing, developing, and implementing emerging technologies enable him to speak with unique perspective on artificial intelligence, blockchain, 5G, and the Internet of Things. Jack integrates his executive experience in industry, technology, and consulting to speak on innovation, change management, and transformational leadership. A global thought leader, he was voted one of the world's top 25 professional speakers and one of the top 5 technology futurists. Jack has shared his insights and advice with nearly 300,000 of the world's top leaders and professionals in 26 countries and in every state. He's a Yale University graduate with an MBA from Kellogg. Jack, welcome.
All right. Thank you very much. As I was saying, As an innovation and technology strategist, I have often been asked to share my thoughts about the future of business and technology. And whenever I do, I always try to keep in mind the wisdom of that great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who put it so well when he said that making predictions is very hard, especially about the future. Nevertheless, I'm going out on a limb this afternoon. I'm going to make a few predictions. So please join me on a short trip to the near future. The latest generation of passenger jet pauses for a moment at the end of the runway at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris prior to being cleared for a non-stop transatlantic flight to Pearson International Airport in Toronto. Several hours later, far over the North Atlantic, an Internet of Things sensor embedded in one of its key electrical components detects that the component has begun to behave erratically. Now, this is not an immediate emergency, but the part will have to be replaced on arrival at Pearson prior to any return flight to Paris. And here's the problem. This is a very expensive part that rarely, if ever, needs to be replaced between scheduled maintenance. And so it's not kept in on-hand inventory at Pearson. Now, in years past, like say back in 2020, this would have meant having to take the aircraft out of service for several hours, perhaps even a day or more, while the part was procured, at great expense to the airline and great inconvenience to its passengers. But no longer. Instead, the airline's smart warehousing system from Texas launches an intelligent procurement agent onto the internet. It searches the IDEA connector database and other sources for current and prospective new suppliers of that part, certified for use on this particular aircraft. It identifies several such suppliers and confirms their quality, reliability, and conflict-free green sustainability through a blockchain-enabled sourcing system from distributed ledger technologies. It then negotiates pricing, terms, and conditions, selects a supplier, adds it to its supply, a new one in this case, adds it to its supplier database, and confirms an online, legally enforceable smart contract with that new supplier. On completion of the smart contract, the supplier issues a picking order and sends a shipping order to Radan Freight Services to confirm delivery of the part to Pearson prior to the arrival of the aircraft from Paris. The elapsed time between identification of the problem by the airline's Internet of Things sensor and the issuance of the pick and ship orders by the new supplier is a grand total of 4 minutes. The part is delivered to the gate an hour before the aircraft arrives, while the aircraft is being serviced. The part is replaced and the aircraft departs on time without a single minute's delay, and with a new electrical component in place to ensure many more safe and reliable international round trips. Now, this may not be exactly how you and your customers are managing major equipment maintenance and parts replacement today. But with emerging technologies and capabilities from solution providers like Texas, IDEA, Distributed Ledger Technologies, and Radan Freight Services, and some of their competitors, these are exactly the kinds of things that you're likely to be doing in the near future. This is all part of what is often referred to as digital transformation. And when applied more specifically to manufacturing and distribution, it's often also referred to as Industry 4.0. In addition to some of the technologies that I've already mentioned, Industry 4.0 includes such things as robotics, augmented reality, and additive manufacturing, or 3D printing. Perhaps one of the most important is AI, and AI is often mistakenly thought of as something completely new and very different from what we've ever done before. In fact, it's just on a continuum from data analytics that we've been doing for years, decades in many cases. Starting out with descriptive analytics, what used to be referred to as business intelligence. What happened? Only bringing the information about the status of your business up to date from, say, weeks or months ago to minutes or seconds ago. Descriptive analytics then segues into predictive analytics, where you look at the trends and project forward to see what's likely to happen in the near future. And that in turn, and this is where we begin to think of it more as AI enabled using tools like machine learning, but also many others, is to go into what's called prescriptive analytics. In other words, determining what needs to be done to achieve a desirable outcome, given the likelihood of what appears to be happening in the near future. So as we move forward, you can imagine that we will see AIs that are so clever that they'll allow you to do automatically such things as schedule production based on maximum machine performance, monitor the performance data for each piece of equipment, assign the right technician to the right task at a point in time, and even predict product sales trends that haven't been noticed by people yet. So you're making or distributing more of what is selling or what will likely be selling in the very near future. Now, another transformational technology, which Mark Dancer mentioned earlier, and which I touched on very briefly, is blockchain. And because the first live production systems using blockchain technology were Bitcoin and digital currencies, many people are under the misconception that that's all blockchain is about. And in fact, that's a relatively insignificant part of what blockchain will be doing for us in the very near future. For manufacturers and distributors, supply chain is a much more important application of blockchain technology. In fact, in a study recently published by PricewaterhouseCoopers, they project by the end of this decade, blockchain technologies, blockchain-enabled supply ecosystems will add nearly $1 trillion per year to the global economic product. Let's take a look at how this is going to happen. One of the challenges we have with supply ecosystems today is that we have manufacturers, distributors, transportation carriers, retailers, and customers all communicating with each other. And frequently that communication does take place electronically, but it's stepwise, one tier at a time, up and down the blockchain, up and down the supply chain. And the result is that you often have information that is delayed, inaccurate, or in some cases missing altogether when various participants need to be able to make decisions. Blockchain changes this parameter completely. And instead, you have all the same participants in your supply ecosystem. But instead of each having their own siloed set of data periodically updated by other participants 1 or 2 layers above or below them in the supply chain, they all share a common pool of secure information across the blockchain. Everyone, as soon as anyone does anything that affects anything or anyone else in the supply chain, everyone who is authorized to see that information can see it immediately. Now, we would not authorize direct competitors, for example, to see price quotes to the same customer. But we would authorize people to see information about the availability and locations of inventory, the timing of deliveries, and so forth, that are going to affect the decisions that they need to be able to make. And this kind of common data pool across the supply ecosystem as a whole is exactly the kind of tool that we need to have in place in order to be able to resolve a lot of the kinds of issues that the customers spoke about in the previous segment that took place prior to the break. Those of you that go into the breakout session after my presentation by Distributed Ledger Technologies will learn about a very exciting application that they worked with to set up for Walmart of Canada, saving millions of dollars a year on freight invoice disputes as a result of implementing blockchain technology. And they'll give you the details on how that works if you're going to be in that session. Now, one of the artifacts that you can have on a blockchain is what's called a smart contract. It's a computer program that can run on a blockchain and can take custody over assets on that blockchain, such as, for example, funds set aside in anticipation of successful completion of a business deal or transaction. It can track what has happened to date, incoming transactions information, and events such as shipping or deliveries, and can then respond to that incoming information or events by updating transactions or events as may need to take place. Another example of how blockchain technology is being used in supply chain is by tracking provenance. Now, some of you may recall a couple of years ago when most of the supermarkets in North America had to pull all of the romaine lettuce off of their shelves, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product thrown away. The reason was very simple. They didn't know where that lettuce had come from and where the lettuce that originated in the location that was shipping out product tainted with E. coli had ended up. It was taking nearly a week to track that information. Obviously, you can't wait a week to make a decision about potentially life or death circumstances. By implementing blockchain technology, Walmart now is working with all of its customers, and many, many other retailers around the world are also doing the same thing. They reduced the time from almost a week to less than 2 seconds to track the source of the tainted product and then where that tainted product was distributed, so that the locations that had the tainted product could throw that away, but all of the others, 98+%, were perfectly safe. The same principle applies whether we're talking about faulty parts, whether we're talking about other types of problems with products or services, parts, materials, that sort of thing. And again, this is part of the reason, along with the increased traceability and visibility that blockchain provides, why PwC sees it saving literally trillions of dollars a year around the world moving forward. So between technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain, in addition to all of the others that we've mentioned, we have some very exciting opportunities moving forward. But none of this really matters unless you have a broader, innovative planning process for anticipating and managing strategic disruptions. By strategic disruptions, I mean such things as pandemics, like the COVID-19 pandemic we're all too familiar with, but also things like climate change, hurricanes, wildfires that are being caused by that, geopolitical disruptions like trade wars and unexpected tariffs disrupting supply chains, even emerging technologies themselves, social media, as well as AI, blockchain, 3D printing, and so forth, are going to have strategically disruptive impacts on many different industries. And one of the challenges is that a lot of people have said, well, how can you even develop a strategic plan that needs to look 2, 3, maybe 5 years into the future for a larger organization when something can come along like the pandemic or climate change and completely stand it on its head? What's the point? We might as well only plan for the next 60 to 90 days and then respond beyond that. There's an old famous saying in the military that the first casualty of war is the plan, and that's true if your strategic plan is one that is the typical static planning process where you get together for a couple of weeks during the fourth quarter, you make some projections about what's likely to happen next year, you make a few operational tweaks around the edges, and then you go on with business as usual, at least until something like the COVID pandemic comes along. But the military has been dealing with these issues for many years. And there is a better way of planning. It's called dynamic transformational planning. We've all heard the old saying, think globally, act locally. But at the same time with dynamic transformational planning, you also think long-term, act short-term. And what this means is that you start by establishing a set of goals. High-level strategic goals needed to execute your overall plan, to leverage your core competencies, resources, and capabilities in order to address the changing needs of the markets that you serve. And at the same time, ensure that you're addressing current and potential strategic threats and disruptions. Now, to achieve any goal, you need to have a plan. So dynamic transformational planning also incorporates plans. You can have more than one plan for a goal. So for example, keep a simple example here. Suppose that your goal is to drive home from work. This is assuming you're actually driving to work these days. You might choose plan A could be take the expressway, while plan B could be take surface streets. And each plan has its advantages and its disadvantages. And you may choose to change plans. For example, if there's an accident on the expressway, you might decide that you're going to go ahead and switch to the take surface streets plan. Now, in order to execute any particular plan, you need to achieve sub-goals. For example, if you're going to drive home, you need to have a car, you need to have gas in the car, a driver's license, and so forth. And to achieve those sub-goals, you may need to execute sub-plans. Now, this sounds rather theoretical when you look at it this way, but using a technique called the plan goal graph, you can see how this works. At the top, you have an overall plan and a series of goals you need to achieve to accomplish your overall plan. For each of those goals, you may have one or a combination of multiple plans that you can execute in order to achieve that particular goal. And in turn, for each of those sub-plans, you may have sub-goals that are required to be able to execute that sub-plan. Now, this all sounds a bit theoretical here, but let me give you some more practical business examples of this. You may have your overall dynamic transformational plan is likely to include some such things as have a workforce, have facilities, have technology, have revenue, address potential strategic disruptions. And if, for example, for have revenue, one of your plans is you're going to sell products. Okay, if you're going to sell products, then you have to have several goals. You have to have products, you have to have a marketing and sales of those products, and you have to be able to fulfill your orders. And if you're going to have a product, well, then there's a couple of different plans. You could buy products like a distributor does, or you can make products like a manufacturer does. Well, if you're going to make products, you have to have achieved a couple of goals. You have to have the parts, and you have to assemble the product. And in turn, to have the parts, one plan could be to buy the parts from a supplier. Another plan could be to make the parts yourself. Well, you can decompose all of these plans and goals down to individual primitive actions that work in your overall planning process. Now, at the same time, we now need to think a little bit about the planning phases for strategic disruptions. And as disruptions emerge, and this is information that is actually taken from the underlying principles used by the Center for Diseases Control here in Atlanta, where I happen to live, for monitoring for disruptions. And it starts with the monitoring phase. Early in the process, you don't know what kind of strategic disruption you might have to deal with, what the likelihood of it is, the severity of its impact, what the timeframes are, other than that it's not immediate. That's the monitoring process. That's really what monitoring is about. But as you are monitoring for these items, you begin to identify somewhere you have a low to moderate uncertainty. The severity appears potentially higher. The time frame may be a little nearer at hand. You may identify some specific potential disruptions. And this is where assessment and active planning come into play. Scenario planning, for example, can be a very important role in this process. Now, this is where many companies and countries were, and most should have been, certainly no later than January of this year with regard to the pandemic. Now, unfortunately, because of some of the political disruptions we had in the US at least, a lot of this got talked down and delayed for weeks or months beyond that point. But by the time you get to the third point, where it's moderate to high likelihood, the severity appears to be significant, we're now in a short to medium time frame horizon, you better define the specific disruptions. Now you're into detailed operational planning. And certainly most businesses were at this point, say by April of this year. And finally, as it impinges on you directly, the likelihood is high, it's in the immediate or very near term horizon, that is where implementation, planning, and execution takes place. Interesting, I was talking to a fellow that interviewed over 100 companies in Europe early in the pandemic and asked how many of them had strategic plans in place to allow for the potential of a pandemic. And out of the 100 different organizations that he interviewed, only one did. And that was the military, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Everybody else had to start from scratch and figure out what to do. With NATO, they said, looks like we're getting hit with a pandemic. Throw a few switches for our pandemic strategy and adjust all of our strategic and operational plans accordingly. This is where we want to be able to be with businesses. In order to do this right, you've got to do, and this was mentioned during the earlier session, enterprise risk adjusted impact. You've got to look at both the likelihood and severity of potential disruptions. Now, obviously, if something is low likelihood and low severity, it's going to be a low priority for you to spend much time and effort addressing. At the same time, if something is high likelihood and high severity, we were certainly there by April and May of this year, that's an obvious high priority to address. One of the challenges that many companies have is they spend way too much time looking at the things that are high likelihood but low severity. What would happen if a competitor came into our market and started competing with us for sales of certain product? Well, that really is something that should be part of operational planning. These kinds of things happen routinely, and we should be thinking about that, not putting a lot of focus on that. And unfortunately, not nearly enough attention is paid to those things that are low likelihood, but if they happen, suddenly tariffs are imposed and you can't get aluminum or steel imported anymore, destroying your supply chain. Hugely disruptive, maybe not very likely, but potentially hugely disruptive. And organizations need to at least have strategies and approaches in place to deal with these things. Now, in the real world, putting together a plan and goal graph typically means that you'd have one maybe 5 to 10 layers deep to facilitate your planning process. But with the right people involved, you could generally do this in just a few days. And it's important to assign variables to balance the relative values of the goals. I mean, you have a lot of goals you need to achieve to execute a higher level plan, but some are clearly more important than others. And at the same time, you have to assign variables to measure the costs associated with executing those plans and achieving those goals. It's also important to estimate the likelihood of your plan's success. This is where what's called Bayesian reasoning comes in. That's about considering contingent probabilities. And we're not going to get buried into the mathematics of how it works, but basically, instead of simply saying, well, what's the likelihood of X happening? It also allows you to address, if X were to happen, then what would be the likelihood of Y happening? For example, if a pandemic were to hit us, what would be the likelihood of the government shutting down our retail operations? After the fact, it's easy to see what that would be. Ahead of time, this is where contingent probability analysis can be extremely valuable. So the monitoring is something that's extremely important. To select the best plan, you've got to monitor your circumstances. You've got to be setting aside some resources to look to the future. What if this or that or the other major strategic disruption were to impact us? How would we respond? This is why people use tools like Waze when you're looking at the traffic situation and trying to decide what route to take to get somewhere. It's also why it's important that organizations actively monitor for potential strategic disruptions and threats, even if such strategic disruptions are not currently happening at a specific point in time. In my opinion, the worst mistake made by the US administration in dealing with this pandemic took place not since the beginning of the pandemic, but 18 months before it emerged. And that was when they shut down the Pandemic Monitoring Office under the National Security Administration. Therefore, when the pandemic did hit us, we had no plans or strategies in place for dealing with it. And we've seen the tragic results. So monitoring for strategic disruptions, pandemics are low likelihood, but obviously high impact. Climate change, high likelihood, but varied impacts across region and industry and so forth. Geopolitical disruptions, the likelihoods are varied, the impacts are varied, but they still have to be considered. And even the impact of monitoring for how emerging technologies may change businesses and industries. It's going to happen, very high likelihood. But the impacts will be varied depending on the industry, the region, the business processes involved, and so forth. So in summary, dynamic transformational planning means that businesses can think long-term and set strategic goals at the same time that they have the flexibility to shift dynamically in the short term and medium term in response to strategic disruptions. This allows them to address both anticipated and unanticipated strategic contingencies, such as opportunities, threats, and disruptions that may occur. Now, it's going to require significant change in the way we think about how we manage our business. It means that strategic planning cannot be a once-a-year project anymore. It's got to be an ongoing process. In my way of thinking, you need to have a minimum of 1% of your employees engaged in strategic planning on an ongoing basis, because it's going to cost you way, way more than 1% of your revenues or profits if you fail to respond effectively to strategic disruptions of the nature of the types that we've talked about. So you've not only got to think about how you might need to change your business model and your underlying business processes, even participate in changing the way that your ecosystem works, such as what I described in the aircraft electrical components example in the near future scenario at the beginning of my presentation. But most importantly, you've got to change your thought processes. And as the famed historian Henry Steele Commager said so well more than a century ago, change does not necessarily assure progress, but progress implacably requires change. I encourage you to make the changes in how you think about managing and planning for your business so that you can be successful in the future going forward. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to have time to take questions at the end of this session because we're going to need to move into the breakouts, and Swati will be jumping in here momentarily to manage that process. But my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out to me by email, even by phone if you'd like. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks so much. Over to you, Swati.
Thank you very, very much, Jack. That's, as always, a very, very inspirational. I especially, the vision of the near future, I think, is important and sort of near and dear to most people on today's call. Yes, a lot has changed in the last few months, and had we known last year what we know now or previously, I think we would all be in a little bit more of a preparedness mode. But thank you very, very much for those very informative and wise comments. And what I wanted to just stress to everybody as well is that this PowerPoint will be made available to everybody who has registered for the event. So again, please look out for that roundup email that'll be coming out within a week as well as this recording. So the next part of this program is what I think is kind of innovative and will hopefully have you all engaged with one another going forward. So what I have sort of worked on is putting together a breakout session program using the Zoom platform. So what's going to happen in the next couple of minutes is I am going to press this magical button, which is going to transport each and every one of you into one of these 4 breakout sessions. Now, many of you have already filled out that survey and provided me with your first choice. So you should be assigned to that particular breakout session. For those of you who didn't advise which session you were interested in belonging to, you will be placed in one of the 4. We have the first session that's being led by True Commerce, our lead sponsor for today. They're going to be talking about vendor managed inventory. IDEA is with us as well. We're going to be talking about data being king and improving data product content. DLT Labs is here with us today, and they're going to be talking about how can you as an organization begin removing cost and waste in your supply chain with blockchain technology. And then, of course, Texas is another proud sponsor of ours. We're going to be talking about smart warehousing, and smart warehouses begin with smarter warehouses. So in a moment, I am going to, again, as I mentioned, launch that button. You will all be transported into another dimension. What you can do at this point in time, if you choose to, is turn on your videos for the breakout session so that you can have some more engagement, and your facilitator will lead you through how he or she will run the Q&A portion of that. This session will run for 35 minutes, so I will see you all back here at about 10 to 4, and we will get started. Hang on tight.
Okay, I hope everyone got teleported back into our main room here. That's a pretty unique experience, changing meeting rooms without even having to get up and move. So anyway, first of all, just want to close things off here by thanking a lot of people here who made this possible. First of all, the EFC team, especially Swati, but the whole team in making this happen. I've been a part in planning both in-person and virtual events. And I would say planning the virtual ones is twice as hard and way more stressful. But the EFC team did a great job in pulling this off. Also, thank you to everyone who spoke. Mark and Jack, our feature speakers, our customers, YL, Martin, and Terry. Thank you guys very much for taking time out of your day to help our entire industry move forward. Those who led the breakouts, IDEA, True Commerce, Texas, and DLT Labs, especially True Commerce for being our lead sponsor. Thank you guys very much. So putting out a pitch here for our supply chain network. If you like what you saw this afternoon, we try doing this on a regular basis, getting these experts in and educating us and discussing things we can do to move forward. So contact Swati. You'll see the information in the information we release. We're going to be sending out a event survey next week, so please check your inbox, or it might be tomorrow, I can't remember. Please help us help you guys at future events by giving us your honest opinion, good or bad. We want to hear it, so please complete those surveys for us. As part of the follow-up as well, we're creating a technology showcase where we're going to include links to all our speakers here, so you can go in and, if you're very interested, to find out more on how you can implement those ideas in your organization. So we'll hopefully make that very easy for you to follow up and get more information. There are some upcoming EFC webinars I want to mention. There's the Future Forum, which includes some marketing and industry awards. Sorry, no, that one's the more the evolving technologies. That's November 5th, and the industry and awards and talent showcase on December 10th. So visit the EFC website if you are interested in any of those. And thank you again very much for your time today. Hope you got something out of it. I found it extremely interesting, and I did get a couple aha moments during the day and the discussion. So thanks everybody, and hopefully we'll see you again on our next sessions.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Swati.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very
Bye,
much,
guys.
everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick.